Well, the Corrections Department has cleared its staff of any failings that could have prevented the brutal murder of Colombian woman Juliana Bonilla-Herrera by her neighbour Joseph Bryder last year. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 23 years and preventive detention. Bryder had been out of jail for just 72 days when he murdered the 37-year-old in her Christchurch home on January the 22nd last year. He had been serving a 7-year jail sentence for a violent kidnapping and rape in Taranaki in 2014. Corrections Canterbury District Manager Tony Stewart is with me now on this. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
The review found the parole sentencing conditions were managed appropriately, but at the end of the day, an innocent woman is dead.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, my heartfelt condolences to Juliana's family, friends, loved ones, and anyone else impacted by this truly horrendous crime. As you say, the Chief Probation Officer of Corrections conducted a review into the management of Joseph Bryder's parole sentencing conditions last year, and that did indicate that the sentence was managed appropriately, that the probation officer was doing all of the relevant checks and doing absolutely everything we could to hold him to account in terms of the 14 parole conditions that he was subject to.
I want to read you something and get you to respond. Bonilla-Herrera had an app on her phone that recorded the noise being made at night time. It recorded the start of her attack, and she said, "Excuse me," before Bryder told her to, quote, "shut up," and threatened to cut her throat. A struggle then ensued. During the next 10 minutes, Bryder continued to threaten to kill her and bound her using a bed sheet and masking tape. Several punches could be heard. She begged him not to kill her. Bryder then took her into the lounge where a struggle continued. She tried to run from him, but was stabbed several times, including the chest. She suffered 51 separate injuries. She died at the door. Bryder then returned home, showered, and disposed of the items used in the murder. But Corrections says they had absolutely no concerns. How can you possibly say there were no concerns and that he was managed appropriately? As I say, this woman is dead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying, Chris, that what you've described is truly harrowing, utterly heartbreaking, and nobody, nobody at all would want to see anything like this happen to anybody. This has had a significant impact on a whole range of people, not least Juliana's family and loved ones, friends, the community, and also our staff. Probation officers and staff all across corrections come to work every day and work really hard to do our job, which is to keep the community safe, and we take that job really seriously. As I say, Mr. Bryder was subject to 14 special conditions imposed by the parole board before he was released into the community. Those included things like not taking alcohol and drugs, so he had an abstinence condition. There were conditions around protecting, electronically monitored whereabouts condition so that we could ensure the safety of the victim. He had a curfew. He had conditions meaning that he had to engage in rehabilitation and reintegration activities, and the probation officer was doing everything she could to ensure he was complying with those things. And as the review indicates, he was complying with those conditions.
But the review found that the GPS data had limited ability to detect small changes of location, and further research was needed. So what happened there? He still was able to murder and leave his home and go next door.
Yeah, so the review indicates that a challenge with the electronic monitoring equipment is with, in this instance, adjoining properties where a residence is within close proximity to the person where the person resides that has the GPS monitoring. Since moving to a new electronic monitoring provider last year, that has enhanced the home zone and the sensitivity to a degree. It's not 100% foolproof, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. And as the review conducted last year by the Chief Probation Officer indicates, we continue to work with that provider around technical and practice solutions to enhancing the sensitivity of the equipment. In addition to that, we'll be working really hard to continue making sound and solid decisions around placement of individuals in the community where it will be in an adjoining property.
This review said many people worked hard to ensure Bryder had the right support in place, and the review found he was managed appropriately with a significant level of oversight and support provided to both him prior to and after his release from prison. I get that, but where was the support for the community?
Yeah, well, I think, as you say, the review indicates that there's a whole raft of people involved in developing a really robust and thorough release plan for people being released from prison. We have around 15,000 of these individuals released from prison each year that we have to, again, work really hard to come up with a thorough plan that addresses all of their needs around accommodation, employment, connection to support people, support services, reintegration, rehabilitation, but like you've said, despite our absolute best efforts, and in this case, doing everything we could to manage Mr. Bryder with as much oversight as we possibly could, a tragedy has still occurred.
Why was the victim never notified? Why was the victim never notified by corrections to say that a violent kidnapper and rapist was living next door? Why was she never notified?
Absolutely hear the concerns of the public around placement of these individuals in the community, but certainly don't take that lightly. And our current notification policy primarily applies to individuals placed in the community that have offended sexually against children, and also individuals subject to extended supervision orders. In this instance, Mr. Bryder didn't meet that criteria. That said, we've heard the concerns and we've heard the feedback around the scope of our notification policy, which is why we have commissioned this external review into our current policy, so that we can be assured that it's transparent, fit for purpose, and that it really does enhance public safety, which is ultimately what we're aiming to do.
Are you saying that the Corrections Department is legally not obliged to tell any resident of Christchurch or New Zealand that a violent kidnapper or rapist is moving in next door?
Well, as I say, we absolutely appreciate the concerns of the public in terms of these people being released into the community and the placement, of them. We have to, of course, balance that with safely reintegrating these people and also their privacy. We've got obligations in terms of privacy legislation. So absolutely all of those things have to be weighed up, and those decisions are not made quickly or lightly. It is a really, they're carefully made decisions in terms of balancing the safety, ultimately the safety of the community. But again, this is why we were really keen to commission this external review, have someone thoroughly look into our current policy so that we can be assured that the policy and the practices we do have around notifying the public are fit for purpose and really do help us to enhance public safety.
Corrections said other accommodation options were deemed unsuitable. So why was the accommodation he was sent to, next to a single woman living on her own, deemed suitable?
Well, in this instance, so Mr. Bryder was released by the parole board in the November of 2021. His statutory release date, which would be the point at which he could no longer be legally detained in prison, was in the February of 2022. His parole conditions would extend just 6 months beyond that. So in around August 2022, he would no longer be subject to corrections oversight. So when we're thinking about appropriate accommodation placement, we're thinking about a place that we can put them that will give them as much access as possible to support in the window of time that we've got them in our oversight and in our care, because we obviously want to make best efforts to set them up to have all the support they need and to succeed beyond the point in which we have oversight of them. And in this instance, that factored into that decision. The placement at this address meant that he had access to the support of a reintegration provider.
The report said that Corrections needs to look closely at the workloads of the Christchurch community corrections sites. Why would that be the case?
Well, the review found in this instance that based on the workflow algorithms that we use to understand how much work a probation officer is carrying, in this instance the review found that the probation officer was carrying a relatively high workload, although those numbers tell just part of the story. When a manager allocates work to a probation officer, the decision is made not just based on those workflow hours, but the complexity of other cases that they have, and also the access to support that probation officers have. They don't manage their workload in isolation. They have the support of a much wider team. They have access to practice experts, managers, and a whole range of things when it comes to managing these cases. I think like the review highlights, what was important in this instance is that based on Mr. Bryder's previous offending and his complexity and the high risk that he posed, he was allocated to a probation officer who had experience in managing these sorts of cases, and she'd completed all the appropriate training.
So therefore, in your view, regardless of the report, what lessons can be learned, and in your personal view, could this tragedy have been prevented within the parameters of the systems that you work in?
Well, I think the lessons that can be learned are sitting in the recommendations that came out of the review the Chief Probation Officer conducted last year. So, there's a series of recommendations in there which have already been completed. So one of those relates to your point around workflow. So a complete review of workloads across the Canterbury district. All of our probation staff was completed so that we could assure ourselves we were allocating work in a fair and equitable but also an appropriate manner to ensure that the right amount of oversight was being applied to all of the individuals that we look after on sentence here. There were also recommendations around ensuring curfews were being loaded appropriately in the electronic monitoring system. There absolutely were some practice learnings. I think it goes without saying, though, ultimately the person responsible for this tragic event is Joseph Bryder. And look, our staff come to work every day. They work incredibly hard to manage some of the highest risk and trickiest people that we have in the community. And in this instance, despite everyone's absolute best efforts and all opportunities being afforded to Mr. Bryder, he has gone on to offend in truly the most horrific manner.
Corrections Canterbury District Manager Tony Stewart, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.